Today on Conversations That Convert, we've got Derek Isaac from Rapid Result Creators to talk about everything to do with growing revenue, growing profitability, and ultimately removing yourself from your business.
Welcome to Conversations That Convert. Each week, Rick teams up with industry experts to tackle practical strategies in lead generation, marketing, and sales for remodelers, home improvement companies, and custom builders. From practical tips to deep industry insights, we cover everything you need to grow a stronger, smarter business. Brought to you by Builder Lead Converter, your perfect sales assistant.
Hey everyone, welcome to Conversations That Convert. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I am here with Derek Isaac from Rapid Result Creators. Derek, thanks so much again for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Glad to be here and excited to dive into the topics today.
Absolutely. We got done doing your contractors summit and had a nice turnout there. It was really interesting. Thanks again for hosting that. Give us a little bit of background on Rapid Result Creators.
Yeah, so Rapid Result Creators, we've been around now for about 5 years. I was coaching. I had my own contracting company, and I've been in the construction industry for 20 plus years. I think similar to yourself, my trade of choice was framing carpentry, and had a subcontracting company, general contracting company, home building, and then started doing consulting and coaching for just some local businesses about 7-8 years ago. Really enjoyed it, getting great results, and started to realize when I started like helping other businesses just how much how much there is to know and to learn, and how valuable the experience is to be helping other people. And then that transitioned into Rapid Result Creators, and now we work with general contractors, helping them systemize their business so that they can scale, get their time back, make more money, be more profitable, all of those good things.
Yeah, that's so important. The craft of being a businessman, not just the craft of doing a great job building custom homes or remodeling homes. So what are some of those common things that you see where builders come to you with and they're really struggling one way or another? Some of those common things that are keeping them from being able to scale and systematize.
Yeah. So there will be different bottlenecks, if you will, depending on the size of the business, is what I found. Not always just the revenue size, but just sort of where the business is at or how long the business has been in place. So usually the kind of the smaller contractors or guys starting out, it's often lead gen, marketing, sales, and estimating is a struggle to get the finances right and make good profits and money. When things start to scale up, maybe you've got a project manager, you've sort of established yourself, then the real kind of issue is getting documented processes, getting the right technology in place, and then which can be fairly quick process depending on if you have help and things like that. And the struggle becomes implementation and getting your employees on board, especially if you have those employees that have been around with you or in the industry 10, 20 years. Getting them onto some sort of new process or new system technology can be a real struggle for some of the businesses that are maybe in the 5 to 10 million range, and the business owner wants to start to step back, start to put more management layers in place. So those are the kind of the big two that I've seen for different sizes of businesses.
Do you find that that's a common issue where the employees are not on board with changing things around in order to scale or systematize the business, and where the builder then is sort of forced to turn over some of his staff in order to get to where he wants to go?
Depending on the size of the business, I think that is always a common friction point and problem to when implementing new systems, is getting the new employees on board. And I've found that it's not rarely systemic throughout the whole company. It's usually like there's a small 20% or so that are hard to kind of get on board. And I think it takes some time and some patience and just letting employees know that it's not that you necessarily want to let people go, especially if they've been with you for a long time, but just letting them know that, hey,
Mhm.
as it essentially falls on the leadership of the business owner to explain and communicate why we need to start doing this, why they need to do things in this new or certain way, how that's going to benefit them, how it's going to benefit the company, and get people on board. So I think that's always a friction point, and depending on the company, it depends. There, a lot of companies do have feel like a good employee base and good culture. Um, so they're not resistant to change. It's just a natural kind of human thing. And if it's not done in the right way, it can backfire, essentially. If it's not presented in a kind of bite size or step-by-step process and it's not explained properly, that's usually where that implementation difficulties come into place, where it's like, hey, we got a new software. I want you to start doing estimates on this, but there's no real training or process or communication, in place. So our process is we want to figure out what's the process. We document it. We create some training videos around it. We let the employees know, hey, we're kind of in developing this. You can expect this to come up. We're not going to do everything all at once. We're going to start with, this small part of, if it's new software, a new process. Also having the employees involved with it. So if you're creating like a project management, standard operating procedure, you definitely want to have your project managers as an integral part of that conversation of like, hey, what do we want to include, or what are your current processes, getting their feedback. And this way, it's not just like you're just handing them some process or system that they haven't seen and don't have any buy-in. If they've been a part of this for, a month, 2 months to get it in place. Now, when it's like, this is how we're going to start running it, it makes sense to them, and it's a lot smoother of a process. So
Yeah, absolutely. So the ownership is a big part of, or letting or giving, I should say, the employees take some ownership in the system's updates, and getting their input and feedback helps create the buy-in, which then helps execute it.
yeah, definitely. And it also kind of sets up this culture and ability as you as the owner of like in the future, once you have those employees that have gone through this process a few times, it becomes easier and easier for every new process or new thing you want to put in the company. They can almost kind of start to implement it themselves or create the stuff yourself, especially if you've got a really good, assistant or admin person that can take some of the heavy load off of you as the owner having to try to put this all in place.
Sure, absolutely. Scaling. So again, the idea, I guess, first is, we systematize, we get our operations figured out, we make sure we're hitting our numbers so that we have the ability to scale. And then how long do you typically budget for, let's say, a timeline? And I realize every builder is different, but what's the average amount of time, say, it takes to get systems in place before you actually would start to focus on scaling?
Yeah. So with our program that we run with contractors, we do a minimum of a year. Um, when you're trying to build out systems across the company, a year time frame is sufficient to touch on all of the key operations and get some implementation in place. Now that'll kind of get not necessarily your base level, but that'll get you at a good place to really have things dialed in and everything operating like nominally is probably about a 2 year to 3 year process. And like you said, every business is gonna be different. If you're, a smaller business with not too many employees, it'll be a quicker process. If you got 20, 30, 40, employees and a larger, builder, then it's going to take a little longer. Also, if you're scaling, right? So if you've come in at maybe like, you're at 2, 3 million, and while we've been implementing systems, you've brought in and now you're up to like 3 or 4 or 5 million, you're bringing in new employees and personnel, that's going to extend the time frame for building out the systems and processes, just because you have a changing business. It's more dynamic. essentially. But a 1 year time frame with our, done for you or provided for you templates and checklists and guidance is a good amount of time to really systemize a business and put you in a really good spot where you can start to scale and step back and delegate effectively.
This is the flywheel effect, essentially, right? The first years, you do all the heavy lifting and you reap the benefits in years 2, 3, and beyond.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that is the way that we do that is very focused. Like we have a systemized approach to system building essentially, but we're starting normally kind of early in the builder's client's journey. So we want to look at the marketing, the sales, um, pipelines, the estimating, the financial management of the company, profitability, margins, all this kind of stuff to make sure that the company is operating profitably and they're bringing in enough leads, which is your strong point, that they can then facilitate all the rest of the work we do. So we very much pick a function of the business that's most needed. Now, if it's a builder that's like, hey, we're crazy with work and we have got to turn people away, then it's we're going to be focusing on probably project management, operations. How can we better facilitate more projects? But there's some prerequisites to scaling to ensure margins are high enough, and also that the lead flow is consistent and high enough, essentially. Because you don't want to scale up and then you get a slow period and then you've got to lay people off or be hurting financially.
Right. That's the balancing act is like reinvesting, generating leads, getting your operations, making sure you're hitting your margins to where you're scaling. Is there a typical recommendation that you have, Derek, where if you say, hey, if you're already doing this amount of annual revenue, this is when you should really start focusing on your operations, and then this is the point here where it really makes a lot of sense to say start focusing on scaling, where you're increasing your opportunities and clients, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Just side note here, Rick, your video is blacked out on my side. So I just want to make sure that your video is running.
It is blocked out on my side too. So regarding that, that number that you want to start at or that you recommend for scaling, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't attribute it to a certain revenue size of a business. We work with general contractors. So when I'm talking about revenues, I'm talking about like builders and general contractors revenue, subcontractor trades company, different dynamics. Typically you're doing smaller job sizes, but you've got more of them and potentially have more personnel out in the field. But as I mentioned, with every client, we always take we do an analysis phase right off the bat, but we're always looking closely at the marketing, the sales, and the estimating, because that's what kind of determines the stability of the company as well as the profitability and margins of the company. So that's the engine. We look at the financials, make sure everything's in place. Because the risk is that if you start to scale too early, or if your financials aren't in a good enough spot, you can't charge enough for your services or aren't charging enough, then you start to scale up, you're going to have these sort of points where you need to take a leap of faith, if you will, where
Right.
you have to bring in your first project manager. So now you've got, this extra person that, it's not necessarily overhead because they're attributing to the projects that are getting completed, but there is additional cost. Same with an admin person. If you've got, if you're bringing your first admin person, or maybe you've got like a part-time admin, or you're bringing it full-time. So there's these certain sort of steps that you're going to need to take. So in that first, like I'd say up to like 1 to 2 million, making sure that your profitability is really good and you've got solid estimating and lead generation, very important. So definitely a big focus. When you're in the probably 2 to 5 million range, then you're switching a bit more to client experience and project management and making sure that you're running projects effectively. And then when you're in the maybe the 5, 10, up to 20, it's a lot more HR based. Of course, all of these are important throughout, but that's where it's like we're expanding maybe, 5 million, you've got a team of, let's say, I don't know, 5 to 10 employees. So HR is important, but it's not something you're maybe doing on a regular basis, or you have someone dedicated to HR. Whereas once you get to 10, 20 million, now you really need to have good recruiting and ensure that your key management people are there for the long haul and being effective. And at every step along the way, the owner's getting more and more removed from the day to day, what's happening on site, to the day to day of maybe, what's happening on projects. So the leadership ability of the owner is another kind of key differentiator, for scaling, essentially.
Yeah, so that leads us into, and you've already touched on it, which would be margins, increasing margins for contractors. I know there's lots of different ways to do it. For me, I've always said, what you charge is always based on the perceived value that you offer, or how specialized or niche down you can create. In other words, people are willing to pay more for a specialist than a generalist. What does that look like for you, though, when people walk through your program or builders walk through your program? How do you get those margins up and then also maintain them, right? Because then there's slippage that you have to deal with.
Yep, definitely. So we look at their branding and their marketing. We'll do an assessment. We're obviously not a marketing branding agency, like yourself, so we're not doing that on part of our clients, but we will do an assessment. What does your website look like? Are there, there's these small tweaks or little things that we can do just to optimize everything that they're doing? Are they on multiple channels as far as, content and different things like that? And what does the overall brand look like? So we want to make sure that at the very least they have a professional brand and it's talking to a specific demographic. Normally it's a little bit broad at first, and we'll help them like narrow it down to some degree so that they've got their bases covered on the branding side. As you mentioned, perceived values, that's kind of where it starts. Then the second part of that is having their marketing systems in place. Again, we're not creating content or doing necessarily strategy on that side, but do they have the basics of lead generation in place, and can they make it consistent, essentially? And like you've got your high level hoodie on there, having some sort of good CRM system, like high level, that can automated sort of emailing, scheduling. There's a lot of beneficial stuff. So the reason we want to front load leads, essentially, so that we've got the right type of people coming in, the right type of clients and projects, and the contractor is not falling into that trap where it's like, we're slow on work, we got to keep our guys busy. I know this project isn't ideal for us, or I know I've underbid this project, but we're going to take it anyways, right? Because that's just a slippery slope and kind of just pushes the problem into the future.
Well, and I'm assuming as you're going through this process, you're investing in your operations and maybe staffing, maybe coaching like you, or third party stuff. And then there's this, what's what I'm looking for? It's this window of where you haven't generated the revenue yet to support that. So in other words, you staffed up for a higher revenue amount. You're not generating that revenue yet, but now you've got a critical time period of where you need to then get those leads converted into contracts. And so you have that cash flow to support the infrastructure that you built. Is that like am I either, as they say, Derek, am I on something or am I onto something?
100%. No, exactly. As I had referred back, where there's kind of like those stages, like those leaps that you got to make, where you bring in a new personnel, or you're looking to scale up. Where the reason you need your margins in the right place is because your margins are going to shrink a little bit during those transition stages, or those leap stages. While you're scaling is a difficult place to be, because things are changing. You're bringing in new people, maybe new software. You got new expensive, maybe you're hiring a marketing agency to professionalize your marketing. So there's these kind of where you've got to operate as a larger business before your actually revenue is kind of catches up with you to make it optimal. And so that's why if your margins are already thin and you try to scale up, this is what destroys contractors is, oh, we're doing 1 million, and I just need to get to 2 million and I'll be making twice as much money. But a lot of people will get to that 2 million and realize I actually made zero money because I've spent it all on new vans and equipment and trucks and an admin person. And I hired, this agency and that agency, which is great investment in the company. But you can find yourself in these like cash shortfalls and crunches that are detrimental. So yeah, we want to front load the business with a good lead gen marketing system so that you can then start to schedule work farther and farther out. Once you've got work scheduled, 6 months to a year out, if you're like a home builder, and you've got steady leads coming in, now if I hire a project manager or I level up, I've got this window of projects lined up at good margins, and I'm going to be, you can kind of see the future. So at that point, you can invest and scale up, and you're not going to be hurting. Whereas if things are still tight and you're running around and scrambling, if you're busy now at whatever, maybe let's say you're going 2 to 4 million. If you're busy at 2 million, you're going to be twice as busy going to 4 if you don't get systems processes and have good margins in place. So
makes sense.
Chasing blind growth is a sure way to kind of wreck yourself and your business without getting the proper structure and profitability.
Have that conversation more than you'd think. Even though we stay on the front end of things and stay in our lane, is that one of the questions I'll ask builders is like, what are your numbers? What are you grossing? What's your markups? What are you netting? And it's like if they're either they don't know their numbers or they're too low, I sort of put up a stop sign and say, look, you need to focus on your operations first, because if you're going to take what little cash you have, you're going to invest it into me. And if we bring you more opportunities, I'm just compounding your problems, and you're just going to dig yourself a deeper hole. So I think that's very important, is that anybody that's listening to this as a builder is like, yes, you want to grow. There's a right way to grow and there's a wrong way to grow. You don't start on the front end with the client acquisition. You start on the back end, make sure that's working properly, and then you work your way forward. And I think that's exactly what you're saying here, Derek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a bit of cart and horse, thing there. But yeah, realizing essentially for like just getting your business healthy, you sort of need both, and you want to do that first before you scale up. Essentially, you need good solid marketing, lead gen, branding, and you need good, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you need some systems, processes, and structure to your business. Like you want to grow, but if you're really trying to double or in the next year or two, then you definitely want to maybe take a step back and just make sure that you're prepared for that, or getting prepared before you really throw a lot of money or time into just generating more business.
I had a conversation right before this call with a client of mine, and so they just went from 2 million to 3 million. It's like, hey, high five, all right, we're on our way. And he confided in me, he goes, Rick, I really want to get to 6. I'm really not doing a whole lot for marketing right now. What should I be looking at? He talked about paid ads or paid social and that sort of thing. And I said, well, Jason was his name, and he said, we want to start with just work on the leads you already have. Let's just do a better job at re-engaging those. So we have something we do called the database reactivation. We do quarterly events. We want to do B2B outreach. And I said, so before you jump into doing ads where you're dropping $2,000 to $5,000 a month just in ad costs, and that's a very high cost with a very low return on investment when it comes to really a high quality lead. Let's go after those freebies, which is that getting more referral business and optimizing those B2B relationships that are not optimized. Let's do more with the leads we already had and improve on our conversions. Let's use things that we can get our leads who are aging and cold to re-engage us and raise our hands, and maybe we can capture or recapture some of those that have been in the database and they for 6 to 12 to sometimes 2 years. It's 12 months and 2 years. Let's do that first, and then let's build on top of that, so that when that lead does come in from that paid ad, if they don't convert right away, is that we have a way to re-engage and recapture them over time. And was sort of a light bulb moment for him where he's going like, oh yeah, I can see that. Cause I said, well, what sort of, operations do you do each week to make sure you're on track? Well, each week we do our team meeting. It's like we start at 10 on Wednesday, we're done at 11:30. We've got a very structured calendar. It's very important everyone's there. I said, well, that's how you have to look at client acquisition too. Is that you have to be just every week we're going to do this. And you've got to be very disciplined with that. And then you just continue to build on top of that. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as just running ads. Because you can drive opportunities in those leads, but if you're not set up to convert those leads into those phone calls and ultimately those site visits or office visits, you're just throwing away all that money, and you're now you just set yourself that much farther back.
Yeah, for sure, and that's why we're big on ensuring that there is some systems and processes in place in the marketing lead gen, even if the business is, we've been in business for 20 years and we've got all the work we can handle. There's still like so much benefits to having a good system in place to nurture the leads and facilitate them and ensure that you're taking care essentially of past clients and continuing to keep them warm and nurtured and all that stuff. Because yeah, especially if you're spending money or time on advertising, you're kind of throwing it out the window to some degree if all you're doing is like expecting just a new lead to come in every time, and then maybe some of them is lightning strikes and you get a new client out of it. But yeah, having a process and nurture sequences with emails and warm-ups, then even those clients, because as you know very well, and I think you've talked on this before about a lot of people that are going to come to your website or check you out online, they're not necessarily in that buying window yet. They're kind of gathering information, they're seeing what's available, checking stuff out. So if you don't have anything in place to kind of follow up and nurture with those leads, then they're just going to kind of go to someone who does, essentially.
And to meet them where I would add to that, meet them where they're at, because the majority of builders, they have the lead can call you or they can fill out a contact form. And that's really the only two ways that they can engage you from your website. Vast majority of leads are not ready to talk. So if you don't give them another alternative to start a relationship with you, that lead comes and goes, and you just paid to get them there. And they've left you and gone to one of your competitors because you have to meet them where they're at. So, it's just like, make it easy to start a relationship and meet them where they're at, and then just stay top of mind with them until they're ready to talk. And hopefully, if you've done your job well, you've created trust and value, and they'll say, well, I'm going to give you a shot. Let's have a conversation. And then it's your opportunity to say no to versus the other way around.
I've got a really, real example from a conversation I had yesterday with a client that really kind of can nail this home as far as like a mindset thing. Is they were contacted to build a home for a potential client of theirs, and their budget was just way out. And the people had already purchased property. They had already gone to the architect and said like, this is our, I don't know if they had, again, I don't know what happened on the architect side, but I'm assuming either budget was not discussed or they were just like really set on a style of home. So anyways, they got plans, they got architectural, spent all this money on designing this home and buying the property. Came to my client because they do a very niche kind of build that this client needed for health reasons. And essentially, they were looking in the 700, 800,000, range. And the client was like, there's no way we build this for under $1 million, probably more. And just a full reason of why, like, you need to be able to reach these people when they're in that
early on
exploratory information gathering stage, because a lot of them feel that they need to talk with the designer architect first, which, great. They're a huge component of it, but without talking to the builder, you can set them on the right direction so much earlier and really serve your clients, your potential clients in the future, so much by getting that conversation early. Even if it is some automated emails that go out like, hey, have you thought about this? Or make sure you talk about budget with your architect and get a builder in the picture earlier before you go and design your whole, future dream home, and then realize later that your dreams have kind of been dashed on rocks because it's just not feasible at that point.
And you hear it's a horrible story, because they probably dropped 20, 30, maybe 1,000 plus with that architect. It reminds me of a story. I had a client once, and he went to meet with a lead and they got into conversation or something, and the homeowner said, I have the world's most expensive baseball bat. And he pulled out a set of architecturally designed plans. He said, I spent $30,000 on these plans only to find out they were twice my budget. Now my kids use it as a baseball bat. Which is like the world's most expensive baseball bat, but it's horrible. And that's why I go back to, and it seems like, Derek, it's regional. Certain regions, the leads go directly to the architects, and then they come to the builders. What I see in the States, it's very much on the coast. West Coast, East Coast is very much that. If you get more in the Midwest and even the South, typically the relationship starts with the builder, and then the builder brings in the architect, but then you can control the budget, based on the needs, wants, and wishes of the home. That's why I said, as a builder, you have to be the go-to resource in your local market. In other words, you have to provide the information on different design ideas and give them pricing and budget ideas. And if you are the go-to source of information, you're going to attract opportunities, and very high quality opportunities. And then you give them an offer they can't refuse, which is the ability to start that relationship however the lead wants to start it. So it might be a phone call, but it might be simply just like an idea book for design, where you're just, again, giving them resources, and then education, create value, create trust, so that when they are ready to talk, and they're going to reach out to you, and at least you can sort of help keep them in budget for what they want and guide them. And that's what you are as a builder, ultimately, is you're a custom home or a renovation advisor.
Yeah. And the beauty of this is, it may sound like a lot and there's a lot that goes into it, but once that system is set up and operating, a lot of this is done on autopilot. Like, obviously you're going to talk with them on the phone, and there will be some personal touch points. But as far as the nurture, the lead gen, the design booklets, like all of that can be set up and automated really, really easily.
Exactly.
Again, easily for someone who has it all ready to go. But it can.
It's a bit of a challenge getting there. But typically we do just when we set people up, it's the bulk of the heavy lifting is 90 days, and then we fine tune it in another 90 days. And so after about 6 months, you're pretty much ready to go, where you can start building on top of that. So in the big scheme of things, 20 years, career, in doing this, in the big scheme of things, it's not that long.
Yeah. And getting back, you mentioned Flywheel. So much of this stuff is a flywheel. Like, that's why I love systems so much, and I'm a big proponent. Like, once it's set and you've got it operating, there's always like tweaks and updates, and it'll continue to kind of change and evolve over time. But once you have one thing set up and it's running, then you can focus on something else, and it's one less thing to keep track of in your brain. And it's just it makes the next thing easier and easier as you get more and more of your business kind of tuned in.
That's the beautiful part of working with somebody like you, is that you start and you're like, oh, you've got all this burden on you where you've got to do 16 different things, right? You're wearing all the different hats. And then once you get to the point where you're quote unquote graduating, you're wearing 3 hats, or maybe just 1 hat. And which leads us to our next topic, of course, which is enabling those business owners, those contractors, to remove themselves from day-to-day operations. I suppose that's for you, when one of your clients is able to do that. It's sort of like, okay, we won, we did it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a huge turning point, and such a kind of feeling of accomplishment when we reach those stages, because that's often the goal of the work that we do with contractors. Yes, they want to scale and grow, obviously, but usually it's an ends to a means of they want more time with their family, or just less stress on their plate with having to like jump positions and be the chief architect or chief operating officer of every little thing in their company. And the way that we do this, early on, we set an organization chart, so we know what does the company look like right now, and then we have a future organization chart. So right now, you as the owner, if you've got a lot of hats, you're going to be in a lot of the different spots of that organization chart. You're the marketer, the sales guy, the estimator, maybe the project manager still, whatever it may be, right? And the idea is to slowly find other people that are going to take those spots, so that you are getting to more higher levels of management. And then finally, the CEO, business owner, main shareholder, whatever you want to call it. And you've got like a general manager, or kind of more C-suite kind of managers in the business. Which sounds great, but it's not always, obviously easy to get to, because it involves changing roles and changing personality, not changing your personality, but like changing your what you're comfortable with, essentially, because
Mhm.
you can get comfortable with chaos and running everything, and especially if you
Yeah.
feel like I've tried to let things go and I've tried to let other people handle stuff, and they let me down, or client got upset or whatever, right? So there's that bit of fear and friction there. And that's why it's so important to have a really documented, dialed in system. Because once you understand that I've built this process based off of how I do it, we've created training around it, we've fine tuned it, and I can bring someone else into that. Now you have trust that they're going to be doing it properly. And you also have a system for checks and balances and decision making, so that if things do slide or someone's not picking up, what they should be, that we've got a process there to ensure that essentially what's happening, and there are checks and balances at the end of the day. So it starts with a really good system and process, which getting pretty much whatever's in the owner's or whoever's running that's head onto paper, fine tuning that, and then optimizing it based on how do we actually, this is how you do it, but how would you actually want somebody else to do it? Because it's probably not going to be the same thing. And then there's going to be a transition phase, essentially, where you will probably still be involved and more of like someone who's checking on to make sure the work's being done right. But there's going to be a point where you can kind of free yourself and let go. And I've had this happen with the number of clients, and it's a great conversation when we get on a coaching call and they're like, yeah, you know what, like trying to think of the exact words that I got. I had a client who came to us a month ago, but I just don't have the busy work that I used to. And essentially, is what they said, and it feels like things are manageable, and I don't have as much stress, and that's a really great place to be, because yeah, there's just so much that you think is necessary for you to do, and you have a hard time giving it up. But in the end of the day, there's a lot of very capable people that just need the right process and training to be able to take it off your hands, essentially.
Last question I wanted to ask you, just out of curiosity, the ultimate exit strategy for any builder or small business owner or business owner, entrepreneur,
Mhm.
is to, I've seen there's three ways to go. Okay, ideally, I'm going to sell my business. I've created something of value that can operate without me. Secondly, you see people that like, okay, I want to turn this over to maybe a second generation, and maybe there's some sort of a buyout that goes with that. The third, it was where you kind of realize I failed, is where you have to shut the business down because you're retiring for whatever reason. So in other words, you come to the realization, I just created a job for myself. I never really created a business. When you're working with your clients, your builders, and they're looking at that exit strategy, is it more often like I want to sell this and get out, or is it like generational where it's more of a family thing? But what do you see like sort of those underlying reasons for builders to being able to remove themselves from the day to day?
Mhm. Definitely. I would say the majority haven't really put detailed thought into it, but the idea is that it would be a sellable business at
Mhm.
some stage. I have worked with family businesses where there is a progression. One in particular where they were on their fourth generation, I think, already, and that's who I was helping. And they were, behind the times, essentially, because they had an amazing business and a great reputation, but because it had been handed down for so long, things were just stuck decades ago, kind of on the way they
Mm.
operated.
Yeah.
But to get back to your question, I think for me, the viewpoint is always, let's create the business that's sellable, because a business that's sellable is easily, like, if you want to pass it on to another generation or have a buyout from family or someone in your network, that's going to be an easier transition, and you're not passing on a job or a headache. Essentially, you're passing on something of value, and that you can be compensated for it at a good valuation. So I think that is usually the typical plan. And the way that I look at it is, let's build, like you said, something that can operate ideally without the owner or with very little involvement from the owner, so that it can get a good multiple and be sellable. Because the vast majority of contracting businesses especially, under 10, 15 million, are just not sellable, except for
Right.
maybe they've got a bit of a client base or brand, and a competitor wants to buy them
Or
out. But
some
but it's
land, which is usually a
pennies on
different.
the dollar, essentially,
Yeah.
at that stage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. Derek, this has been awesome. We covered quite a bit here, but very, very invaluable information here. So anybody that's listening, if they want to talk to you more about helping them, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, best thing to do is go to our website, rapidresultcreators.com. If you search us on Google, I'm sure it'll pop up. And from our website, you can book a strategy call with us, call a business builder call. You jump on a call. We you tell us about your business, where you're at, where you want to go, and we'll give you some clear insights and guidance as far as building systems or scaling, or depending on your goals. And then we can share about our coaching programs. We got a number of one-to-one coaching programs, done for you services to take the implementation burden off your plate, depending on the size you're at and how much help you want. But that's the best place. We've also got free resources down there for learning and guidance as well to help you. So visit our website, and we've got tons of information and ways to reach out to us.
rapidresultcreators.com, and wherever you're watching and or listening to this, we'll put a link for that below in the description to make it easy for you. Derek Isaac, thank you so much for joining us today on Conversations That Convert.
Thanks, Rick.
For my brothers and sisters in Christ, may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all